Hello and welcome to a special Remembrance Day interview here on Viking.TV with me, Anne Diamond. Of course, this week we're remembering veterans, those who gave their lives and others who made awful sacrifices in times of war throughout the world. And today, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we in Britain traditionally do so by wearing poppies and commemorating the signing of the armistice at the end of World War I. The war they thought would end all wars, but sadly didn't. In most countries today, it's a very special day for remembering and honouring. I know in America, it is Veterans Day. And I guess in a few hours' time, there'll probably be massive meetings and parades and commemorative events as we all pay our respects. So today, I thought you would especially like to hear the story of a young man I first met back in the 90s when he returned home after an horrendous experience on his first sortie in the Gulf War in 1991. On active duty, he was shot down on the first low-level daylight raid of the conflict, captured and tortured. He was paraded on television, provoking worldwide condemnation and leaving one of the enduring images of that war. And it went around the world on front pages like that. Thankfully, he and his pilot were eventually released. Here is the short version of what happened to them. Have a look at this short video.
I don't think anybody of my generation really expected to go to war at that level. The notion of 50,000 personnel and 150 plus RAF aircraft going to war, no. I mean, we were the Cold War warriors. I certainly never expected to go to war.
Unless Saddam Hussein gets out of Kuwait and goes back to Iraq, we will invite you to forcibly remove him with your allies.
It was incredible to be part of. It was just a massive force.
The firepower we witnessed this afternoon was 4 times that of the guns used at the Battle of El Alamein.
We were the second major wave of attack. So the first wave went out at midnight-ish to hit around kind of 3-4 o'clock local time in total darkness. And we were the first daylight attack, attacking an airfield in southeastern Iraq. It all went wrong. Myself and my pilot were shot down, captured.
How you have been shot down?
I was shot down by an Iraqi system. I do not know what it was.
Incredibly, after that, he eventually returned to active duty and was involved in policing the exclusion zone as part of the United Nations force maintaining the fragile peace in Bosnia. He has served around the world, from the Nevada desert to the Middle East and Norway to the Falkland Islands. And then he retired from the Royal Air Force and has since carved out a massively successful career as a speaker, best-selling author and journalist. In fact, he was on TV, I think, this morning at 11, reminding us all why Remembrance Day is still so important. So let us welcome him now, joining us from his home, John Nichol. Lovely to see you again, John. Hi.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for having me on. I'm really pleased to be with you on Viking Cruises.
Well, it's lovely to be with you, and we're both very proudly wearing our poppy. And as I said, I know people all over the world are remembering in their own various ways. And so many people watching right now are American. We have a lot of people watching from the United States, and they're probably just getting ready to go out and celebrate or commemorate Veterans Day too. That video there, which I know you probably hate watching, was to commemorate, 30 years. You are indeed part of history, aren't you?
I mean, it's curious that you say that. I remember being at the Cenotaph a good few years ago now. I always marched with the Royal Air Force Prisoner of War Association. So when I started, there would be, I don't know, 50 or 100 of the old boys. They're now, sadly, none of them. And I remember chatting to one of them maybe 15 or 20 years ago and saying about how we were kind of commemorating the Gulf War and how people were still interested in it. And he said, John, you have to realize that you're part of history. And I thought that was quite strange for a World War II veteran to be telling me that I was part of history. But I guess it is. It's kind of quite a curious label to have. I mean, it was 30 years ago, or as my wife tells me, 30 years and 4 stone ago, Anne, to be perfectly honest.
That's hard.
But you know, I mean, it's what we joined for. It's what people join the military for. You know what you're getting into, mostly. So kind of changed my life. But hey, that's what you take the Queen shilling for.
Oh, it really, absolutely. So on a day like today, what do you think of, or who do you think of on Remembrance Day?
I have mixed emotions and mixed memories. After I was on this morning on ITV, just after the 2 minute silence talking about it, and afterwards I went onto Twitter and looked through the hashtag Remembrance Day 2021, and I was really quite emotional because there's people talking about their grandfather or their great grandfather, and there's pictures of them, and then you get to pictures of younger people who've died in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So for me, I remember the generations of sacrifice. So the World War I generation, the World War II generation, they're really important to me because I know so many of the World War II generation. Last weekend, I was at the Bomber Command Memorial in Green Park, outside the Royal Air Force Club on Piccadilly, and I was with some of the Bomber Command veterans as they did their little service. 97, 98, 99-year-old men. There was a 100-year-old there as well, and they're frail and they're weak, and they're old, but they were determined to be there. They were determined to stand up, and they were determined to make that commemoration. So I think of those generations, but I also think of my friends who died, and I know, either not just in conflict, but in training. Yeah. Sometimes you could have 10 people a year dying in training accidents, quite easy in the late 80s and the 90s. And I think for me, most importantly, I think about the current generation. So the young men and women, the young warriors who took our places, the people, not just the warriors who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, the warriors who stand on the front line tonight with the NHS, in the ambulances, driving the ambulances. The warriors who were there during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, either doing the testing or giving the vaccine. So I think for me, I go back 100 years, but I think most importantly of the current generation who are far better, far more well-trained, far braver and courageous than we ever were.
We're told that the Queen is going to make it to the Cenotaph. You mentioned the Cenotaph earlier. For any of our American viewers who don't know London very well, the Cenotaph is the place in the middle of Whitehall, the great big street where Downing Street is off to the left, and the Cenotaph stands there in the middle of Whitehall, this big, long, wide avenue where all of the commemoration is done. We're told the Queen is determined, despite the fact that she hasn't been very well for the last couple of weeks, she is determined to be there on Sunday, because we now mark Remembrance Sunday as the first Sunday after the 11th. How important, when you're a young RAF officer, or when you're going through the awful confinement and torture that you went through, how important is it that you say you took the Queen's shilling, but you swear an allegiance to Queen and country? How important is that to you in those times when you're being tested the most?
I think I wouldn't want to misrepresent it. So I'll be there on Sunday. Perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think when you're a young man or a young woman, I joined in 1981 and I was 16 when I signed on the dotted line. And I had no thoughts of Queen or country in that respect. I was proud to wear the uniform. I wore it with pride, and I've always worn it with pride. But I think most people that I have spoken to, most people that I served with, most people that I speak to for all of the books that I write, would say that whilst the service, the tradition, the honor, the country is important, what you're really doing as a serviceman or servicewoman is serving for the man or the woman on your left or your right. You know, when you're either going over the top, literally or figuratively, when you're flying into battle, if you're in Afghanistan and you're attacking a Taliban position, you're thinking of your mates, and that's the thing that you hold dear, because you know that they will literally give their life for you. They will lay down their life for you in an instant. And that's what you hold dear. All of that said, the tradition of your service is important as well. So for me, the Royal Air Force, I think of the Battle of Britain veterans, sadly, all but one gone now. The Bomber Command veterans, sadly, not that many left anymore. I think of the people who went before me, but mostly you're thinking of the people who are either side.
Yeah, and that in itself is an amazing thing. Of course, the guy that who was shot down with you, your pilot, because you were the navigator on board the Tornado, your pilot was John Peters, JP. He was very naughty in that he's always made fun of how chubby you were.
Wow, seriously.
Look, I have to say, there you are, both gorgeous young men, before, obviously, what happened. But even after those weeks of torture and confinement, he still joked about that with you, didn't he? So there's obviously this sense of camaraderie and...
Come on, and you've been around military people now, then you know that. Listen, it is part of the culture. Sometimes we know that it's gone too far sometimes, but the notion that you rib your mates, the notion that it's just part of the system, the way that sometimes it's a way we deal with the black stuff, the awful stuff. And I remember when we were prisoners of war. So first of all, in 7 weeks, I lost 2.5 stone in 7 weeks. So my good lady wife says I should be popping back there quite soon, in actual fact. She really does. So I think about 5 weeks in, we were bombed by some of the Allies. And we were in one of the secret police headquarters in Baghdad. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time. But we were bombed and the guards ran away, and we were left on our own. And we were all in solitary confinement, these brick, horrible cells. And people started to shout at each other. And I heard somebody shouting at me, John Nichol, are you in here? And it was a mate of mine from from training days. And I said, who's that? And he said, John, it's Simon here. Simon, how are you, mate? And I said, he said, John, I've got a message for you. A message after 5 weeks of captivities, torture, brutality, near-death experiences. And I said, Simon, what's the message? He said, a message from my friends, my family, from my loved ones. And he said, John, I've just been shot down. And you need to know that your picture's been all over the world. Everybody knows what you look like. And he said, do you know what? I bet you're not a fat bastard anymore, are you? And so this is in the middle. Sorry for swearing on Viking.TV. My apologies.
We get it. We get it.
And so this is in the middle of near death. We had nearly died. And people still made fun of my waistline. And but you know what? That's the reality of military life.
Yeah. And what did you answer? You said, no, I'm much thinner now. And here I am sitting with a tin plate on me.
Yeah, I had. Well, because literally we were in this reinforced concrete building and it was falling apart. And we had in the cell, we had a plastic bowl for water. And because I thought there might be bombing and a fire. So I had a little plastic bowl the size of a pudding bowl with maybe 1/3 of a pint of water in it to put out a fire. Not quite sure how that was going to work. But when this all happened, I tipped the water out and put the plastic bowl on my head to make a steel helmet or a plastic helmet. It didn't work. But it was a curious old time.
Yeah, well, gosh.
Do you mind if I continue to have my glass of red wine while we chat?
No, please do. I think you really do deserve it. Oh. When you look back, I mean, is there any way you can do you know what went wrong with your plane?
Well, I mean, to be fair, there was nothing wrong with the aircraft. I mean, John Peters and I were going in towards the target and the attack went wrong. And that was almost certainly all of my fault. Simply because there's a sequence of button pressing that you have to do. And I think, almost certainly I got that wrong. But the bombs not coming off the aircraft were not connected to being shot down maybe, I don't know, a minute and a half later. So we were heading out from the target at about, I don't know, 500, 600 miles an hour. And he was flying visually at maybe 30 feet above the desert. So kind of rooftop height. And we were hit by a heat-seeking surface-to-air missile. And it was like being hit by an express train. And it knocked us out of the sky, but we were still flying, kind of tumbling like a sycamore leaf. So there was nothing wrong with the aircraft per se until it was hit by this heat-seeking missile.
Yeah. And I know that at one point you sensed that John was preparing to eject. And didn't you yell at him, don't eject, don't eject? Was that because you knew you would have to come down in enemy territory?
No, it was more that I knew that he could save the aircraft for the moment. And so basically what he was saying, and I understood it, was that the aircraft was out of control and we were literally a nanosecond from hitting the ground where we'd been killed. And he said, prepare to eject. And I said, don't you effing well eject, get hold of it. And he did. And there are a number of actions that you can take. And he managed to get the aircraft under control with supreme piloting skills. And that then gave us probably, I'm trying to remember, maybe a minute or a minute and a half, 2 minutes, to try to then limp further away from where we were. We were still going to come down in enemy territory, but it gave us a little bit of breathing time. And that's what we did. We kind of tried, the aircraft was on fire, it's burning, but we limped a bit further in the hope that we might get rescued if they could send in a special forces helicopter team to rescue us.
Yeah, but the way you describe in your book, just the moment of ejecting is terrifying enough, let alone knowing that you're going to eject and land in enemy territory. But ejection is not an easy thing, is it? It's like an explosion happening.
In actual fact, it's bloody easy, in actual fact, because you just pull a handle and technology takes over. And Martin Baker, who made our ejection seats, I think I was chatting to somebody from Martin Baker today, and since this ejection seat was invented in 1949, they have saved 7,761 lives. So so it's a fantastic invention, but it's all automatic. So you're sitting in you're strapped into your ejection seat in your jet. You pull a handle, and technology takes over.
You go
and your arms are. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but you go to an amazing G-force, don't you?
Yeah, I mean it's so you pull a handle, you have to give it a good old yank, and technology takes over, and your arms are dragged into your sides on straining straps. Your shoulder harnesses tighten and hold you into the back of the seat. Your legs are dragged into the back of the seat. The Perspex cockpit above your head, you can see where is it there? You can see a tornado on my wall. The Perspex cockpit is blown off. The rocket motors in the ejection seat fire, and you accelerate from 0 to 200 miles an hour upwards under 18 times the force of gravity in just under a second. And then everything is automatic. And you're sitting in your seat, you're strapped into your seat, but everything is enclosed within your seat. And so you do nothing other than pull a handle. And then suddenly, basically, automatic scissors cut you free from the seat. You can see. So if the picture that you've shown there, so I'm sitting in a tornado, you can see my screens in front of me, but behind me is the ejection seat. And you can see the kind of a yellowy things there. They're the straps that go over your shoulders. And then that big thing that says TND 21S or 218, that's where the parachute and everything is. So everything is enclosed. And so when it starts to cut you free, a parachute comes out of that box that's next to my head there, and it deploys and it pulls out another parachute, and then these cutters cut you free from the seat, and you end up in a parachute. And from all of that explaining that I've just done, from pulling the handle to being in the parachute and floating down, is 1.7 seconds.
Oh, crumbs.
That's how, and it's even now the new seats are amazing. I was chatting to somebody today, he said it's now 0.6 of a second from pulling the handle to being in the parachute. And
well, I was going to say, what's amazing about that is that, yes, it saves your life, which is miraculous in itself. Yeah. But of course, from that moment onwards, when you pulled that handle, you are no longer the master of your own destiny. And you weren't. We've got another little clip of that video, which tells, I suppose, the rest of the story in very short form. Let's just have a look at that now.
How you have been shot down?
I was shot down by an Iraqi system. I do not know what it was.
It was, I would say, one of the last truly successful conflicts. And I say that because people have forgotten what the Operation Desert Storm was about. It was United Nations mandated. The world came together to evict Iraq from Kuwait. Iraq had invaded, brutalized, occupied Kuwait. The world came together to say, you can't do that.
This is a victory for the United Nations, for all mankind, for the rule of law, and for what is right.
Somebody said to me, it was a World War II veteran, and they said, John, you're part of history now too. And I thought, I'm not old enough to be part of history, but I am. It's 30 years ago, or as I like to think of it, it's 30 years and 4 stone ago now. It's a long time ago. So I am part of history, I guess.
John, when you look back, that incident, of course, did define the rest of your life. That can't be helped, I suppose. Do you resent that?
No. Look, I said at the beginning of this that I took Her Majesty's shilling, and I was well paid. Listen, not as much as an MP's paid. Are we allowed to make those sort of comments at the minute?
Oh, I think so. I think anything's allowed today.
No, but we were well paid. I was a young man. I left my council estate in Newcastle and joined the Air Force. We were well paid. I had a great life. It was honestly a fantastic life. And so for 7 weeks, it was a bit rubbish. But, and I've said this many times, on a number of occasions during those 7 weeks, I truly thought I was going to die. I truly made peace with a maker that I believed in and thought I was going to die. And I didn't. But if I hadn't been shot down, captured, tortured, and paraded on TV, because that was the defining thing, because that's what led to me becoming a household name. Nothing that I have today would have come about. So I wouldn't be talking about my, 17th book. We wouldn't be talking about that. I wouldn't have the wife that I have. I wouldn't have the daughter that I have who's revising for exams out there, who refused to come and say hello to you earlier on, as you know. So none of those things would have happened. Life sliding doors moments. It was awful, but it was only 7 weeks. And everything that I have today is because of those awful 7 weeks. So no, I don't resent it at all. In fact, I wonder what I would be doing, because I know I wouldn't be with my wife.
I was going to ask you that. What do you must think about that. What would have happened to me if I'd come back safely that night?
What's the answer to that?
What sort of person would I be now?
I don't know. I know for a fact that I wouldn't be married to the wonderful lady I'm married to. I wouldn't have the wonderful daughter that I have. I wouldn't have the life that I have. I've written 17 books. I now make my living from writing. My dad worked at bloody shipyards for 40 years or 50 years. So I have an easy life. I left school at 16. I joined the Royal Air Force, and I've never had a proper job since, ever. I haven't. And so, so I'm lucky. So I don't know what I'd be doing. And I tell you what, you and I would never have met. We wouldn't have. All of the people. I was at the Daily Mirror Pride of Britain Awards last week, sitting with the most amazing Doreen Lawrence, whose son Stephen was killed, brutally murdered, sitting with her, chatting to her. What an honor and a privilege to sit and chat to somebody of that caliber. None of that would have happened.
I know, and you devised and you made a series called Survivors on television, where you actually did interview people who've been through these life-changing events. And you must have discussed this with them yourselves. Whether if something hadn't happened to them, would they have turned out the same sort of people? Which of those stand out for you?
Oh gosh, I did 2 or 3 series of that. 20 odd years ago now. A number. So one of my favorite. I spoke to Simon Weston, who was burnt in the Falklands War, obviously. So Simon's a good friend of mine.
Yes, Simon. For people watching at the moment who don't know, Simon Weston is one of our great heroes, but he was just a young lad in the engine room, wasn't he, of this enormous aircraft carrier, was it? It was a warship.
It was during the Falklands War, and he was a Welsh Guardsman.
It it was horrendously bombed, I think, by an Exocet missile, and he was so unbelievably badly injured and burned, and he's turned out to be the most awe-inspiring person. And I've said it to him myself.
Yeah.
What do you think you would have been if you'd never been injured that day?
So that was the series. That's the series that I wanted to make. People always say, "What would you have done differently? Do you wish it never happened?" And the whole point is Simon tells this story, same thing. So Simon was burnt 90% of his body, really, really badly burnt. I mean, visibly scarred from head to foot. And so I've been out in London with Simon having a beer, and people can be quite rude and offensive to Simon because of his scars. But Simon says that if this is me now, this is what I am. And he says, if I hadn't been hideously burned, nearly died, I wouldn't have the wife I have and the children that I have. And I say the same thing. So it was fantastic chatting to Simon. Here's another one. One of the first people I interviewed was Heather Mills.
Yes.
Do you remember that name?
Yeah. Who later married
Mills
McCartney,
who married Paul McCartney. So Heather Mills lost a leg in a police motorcycle accident in London. And I chatted to Heather. This is now 20 odd years ago, well before she met Paul McCartney. And she said the same thing. Slightly different story, I suppose. But I was at the Daily Mirror Pride of Britain, was the first one. So I'm thinking that must have been, I don't know, 98, 99, I don't know, something like that, 99,
yes,
1999, when she met Paul McCartney. And the whole point is that
she met him at that lunch, didn't she?
Yes, yes. I was standing with Piers Morgan, bit of name dropping going on. So Piers was then the editor of the Daily Mirror. And we were standing together nattering, and he introduced Heather to Paul McCartney. Now, Heather would not have been there if she hadn't gone through that trauma. And so that's all of these life sliding doors of the way things happen in your life. It's weird, isn't it?
It is weird. It's astonishing and totally worthy of writing about and making programs about. You're right. It's absolutely incredible. And for you, I mean, yes, you did go back into service, but you've since carved out this amazing life talking and speaking and writing on military matters, first of all. But I know you even write novels nowadays. But the amazing thing I know that you celebrate so much is the people you've met, not just the famous ones like you've just mentioned, but you clearly love meeting people who were veterans, people who have set themselves amazing goals. You love people, and we've got some lovely. For instance, who is this?
They're both air transport auxiliary girls, sadly both gone now in actual fact. They
used to fly the planes around Britain,
so that
they were in the right place.
I met them because of the Spitfire book that I wrote. So I interviewed about, I don't know, 40 or 50 Spitfire veterans, sadly, all gone now. And they were two of the ladies that delivered the aircraft during the war. So in the days when you still had to ask your father's hand to get married, in the days when women were still, the glass ceiling hadn't been invented, never mind broken. They were flying aircraft around the country, delivering them to frontline units. What a pair of, oh my giddy aunt. Utterly delightful, utterly delightful.
I mean, there must have been women like them in the United States as well, women who, as you said, were undervalued in every other walk of life, but they could fly airplanes, and very often they flew them entirely on their own, great big airplanes too, not just
fly them on their own. I mean, they had basic flying instruction that said, okay, if you do this, the aircraft does that. If you do this, the aircraft does that. This is where you put the landing gear down or whatever. And I can't remember who it was who told me, I don't know if it was Joy or me, said she landed at an airfield delivering, I think it was a Sterling bomber or a Lancaster bomber, I can't remember. But she got out and I think she must be 5'1" or something like that. So a crew normally of 6 or 7. And she got out and said, "Here's your new bomber, guys," type thing. And the RAF were saying, "Oh, okay, this lady has got out of here." And she said, and so this she was quite annoyed by it. She said, "This young man said to me, 'Where's the pilot?' And she said, 'Young man, I am the pilot.'" And so they didn't need a crew. They did it on their own, and they flew with very little instruction. They were the most amazing people, the most astonishing generation.
They're absolutely, they stepped up to the mark, didn't they?
Oh my giddy
I've got a lovely picture of you, because we're remembering again, it's Remembrance Day today, a lovely picture of you, I think in Camp Bastion, at the sort of Remembrance Memorial there, which must have been amazing to stand by. And of course, it has those incredible words there. For your tomorrow, we gave our today, which still gives you a lump in your throat when you even say it.
I'm emotional looking at the damn thing. So that was Camp Bastion. I think I went there maybe 8 years ago or something to write an article about the new generation of warriors. And if you look at the
again, just to explain to everybody, Camp Bastion is the British camp in Afghanistan.
It not just the British and American. So so I went there, and it was the massive British and American massive hub in Afghanistan. I can't remember how many thousands and thousands of people, but it was massive back then. Sorry, it's Iraq, not Afghanistan.
Iraq, and that's apparently that was where there was this amazing hospital.
Sorry, it was Afghanistan. So
it was Afghanistan. Where you could get, if you could get anyone wounded back to Camp Bastion, to the hospital there, it was something like 98% of the time be saved. It was such
unbelievable to go and see what they did, to go and see the military hospital there, where they would fly in people. And I was there on a couple of occasions when the sirens would go up and they'd be flying people in. Utterly unbelievable. And that memorial wall, obviously because Camp Bastion was given back to the Afghan forces when we withdrew, and that memorial wall was taken down. I think most of it or some of it is now rebuilt at the National Memorial Arboretum in Stafford. But it was really to be there to look at that. And if you look at the left of that picture, there's a cross. That cross is a shadow, and it's built the first memorial. So it's a very small memorial that was built bricks, and it's built out of shell casings, and it casts a shadow on it. Really, really, really strange to be there with young men and women who were dying when I was there. You kind of,
I know
it's a privilege to be there, but still difficult.
Difficult to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah. Very.
Your career then as a writer started, I suppose, with your first book, which was the autobiographical Tornado Down. And of course, that describes everything that happened to you and was understandably an enormous bestseller. You co-wrote it with John Peters. Did you know how good a writer you were?
Well, some people, Anna, would still say I'm not a very good writer, but
you're a terrific writer.
Oh, that's kind of. I've got. I left school at 16. I got a B in English language at O level. The O levels were the school exams you did when you were 16. And I got an A in English literature, which is the kind of the righty bit. But the honest answer is no. I just kind of tried to write the stories. I just kind of try to reflect the reality of what it is like for people. I take other people's stories and write them down. And so, did I know I was a good writer? No.
No, but you did it.
Maybe it does.
Would you mind reading an excerpt from that book for us?
This I'm going to do, if it's okay. I'm going to read one from Tornado. So this
is your new book about Tornado, yeah?
And the reason I want to do this, Anne, is because this is about other people. So this is about, I wrote about my story in the Gulf War, but this is about everybody else's. And most importantly, Anne, it's about the families of those who were there. So I'll give you a quick bit. So this is my great friends, Dave Waddington and Robbie Stewart, who were shot down 2 nights after me. We were doing about 620 miles an hour, 200 feet above the desert in total darkness. Everything was running on rails as we approached the target. Then all hell broke loose. I remember the missile being fired at us. I broke left and I shouted, "Chaff." Robbie felt an enormous blast drop the tornado. There was a blinding orange flash and the missile exploded near the front cockpit. All Dave saw was searing light. The cockpit was consumed by an enormous flash. Everything happened in just fractions of a second. I knew I was losing consciousness and I was trying to get my hands towards the ejection handle, but I just couldn't move them. A secondary warning now kicked in, this time a more urgent tone, like a submariner's crash dive blast, signaling multiple aircraft systems failures. Shrapnel had shattered the cockpit and enveloped the underside of the tornado, shredding the hydraulic lines, the fuel lines, causing electrical failure and a massive fireball. The sirens then ceased as the tornado started to disintegrate. Dave felt a hurricane force wind buffeting his body. He had one final thought. It's game over. I'm going to die. And so that's what was happening to Dave in the desert. And so the way that I write it, I like to mix the stories up. So I then interviewed Dave's mum, who's 95 and lives up in just outside Manchester. So Dave's mum, and you'll remember this, was watching the war unfold live on TV. And so she's watching what is happening and knowing her boys. He was only 25, 26, knowing her boys out there. After despairing at the TV coverage of the war, Dave's mother, Berenice, had taken to listening to the radio news at their terraced home in Bolton. Late that night on the 19th of January, the BBC had reported that yet another tornado had been lost. She took little notice and went to bed. It couldn't possibly be her son. A few hours later, she awoke from a fitful sleep. Somebody was knocking at the door. "Who's that?" Berenice asked her husband, Jack. Their clock told her it was 1:30 a.m. Jack got out of bed, shrugged on his dressing gown and headed down the hall as she sat at the top of the stairs, fearful of what was about to unfold. He opened the door and she could see 2 RAF officers in smart blue uniforms. "Are you the parents of Flight Lieutenant David Waddington?" one asked. "Yes." "Can we come in?" Reluctant to move, Berenice watched from her vantage point at the top of the stairs as they stepped inside. "I just thought, oh no, this is bad." Then she took another sharp breath. They had brought our parish priest. Then I knew it was very bad. And so that's what I try to write about, Anne. That's the reality of war, whether it's about World War II, about the Lancaster or the Spitfire, or about tornadoes. Warfare is about normal men and women who put their lives on the line and their loved ones who wait at home. And that's what I try to write about.
Yeah, it's like that scene out of Saving Private Ryan, isn't it? When
it's exactly that. Yeah.
When the lovely mother is there washing things up in the sink and she sees this car arrive and some big army generals get out, and that's the worst thing ever.
I spoke to a friend whose husband was killed in training before the war, and he was quite a senior officer, and his wife, again, 1 o'clock in the morning, doorbells ringing. She said, "What the hell is going on?" And she said, "Oh, he's forgotten his key. He's forgotten his key." So I'll go. She thought, if he'd forgotten his key, he'd say something. So instead of going down in her nightclothes, she put a dressing gown on. And she walked downstairs and she looked through the spy hole. And the station commander, the most senior officer on base, was standing outside in full dress uniform with his hat on. And she knew. She said, "I'm not opening." She said, "I fell back against the stairs and I refused to open the door, because if I open the door, I know what he's going to say. Yeah. And eventually, she had to open the door. And, he was dead. He's dead. He was gone.
It is Remembrance Day today, and that's why we should be remembering stories like this. But they're still very hard to take, aren't they? You've had a love affair, however, with the tornado. I mean, you've written about it at least 3 times, I think, haven't you?
Yeah. That was my aircraft. So I was lucky. I joined the Air Force at 16 as a young airman. So I was a technician. In the old days, a private soldier. I was lucky enough to, after 4 years, to get commissioned. I became an officer. People called me sir. Still don't understand why that happened. And I was a navigator on Tornado GR1s. And so that's what the brand new book is about. And then flew Tornado F3s in Bosnia.
You sent us some video. I'm not sure which Tornado this is.
Let's have a look. I'll talk you through it.
Well, exactly. Talk us through it.
Yeah.
It's
So that is low-level flying in a Tornado, as you can see, on the 17th of November, 1990. So that's preparing training. So that's flying at maybe 50, 75 feet over the, I would imagine, the Saudi desert, I'm thinking, preparing our training. And this is, okay, so this is now showing off. So that's flying at lower than 50 feet, while somebody on the ground, probably illegal, it's completely illegal. So that's probably flying at maybe 50 feet and 600 miles an hour, something like that. And this is the Falklands in the Tornado F3. So this is probably 1994, 95, after I'd swapped over onto a different aircraft. And the Falklands War, for your American viewers, was obviously 1982, after Argentina invaded the Falklands and were evicted after a 3-month war. But we continue to have a presence in the Falklands, and so we have an air defense patrol down there in case. I mean, it's unlikely now, but back in the 80s and the 90s, there was a chance that something else could happen. Yeah. So those videos that were when I was down there in the mid 90s.
Now, I know we showed a picture earlier of some of the lovely people you met, Joy and Mary, for instance, but you've met lots of other people in your work, because I know you work very strongly with the Royal British Legion, and you're patron of the British Ex-Service Wheelchair Sports Association. Yeah. So who is this we're looking at now?
Well, that is Alan Scott. So Alan was a Spitfire pilot. Served in the UK in 1942. Sorry, 1941 at the 1940 at the end of the Battle of Britain, and then 1941 in Malta. Alan featured in my Spitfire book. A delightful man. Sadly, again died last year. So he was the last. He was the last to die from all the 40 veterans that I spoke to for my Spitfire book. He was the last to die, and his son asked me to give the eulogy at his funeral, which was an absolute honour, but quite difficult to do. A delightful man, as many of that generation were. A delightful man.
Well, they were extraordinary. Churchill called them the few, but they were pretty extraordinary. What's happening there?
This is Brian Bird. Brian. So Brian's in the Spitfire book as well. Again, sadly gone now. So I managed to get Brian back in a Spitfire. We did have a few dodgy moments. So I think Brian was probably 94 or 95 then. And a friend of mine who took him flying in the back of a Spitfire. He, as you could see, he could barely walk. He arrived in a wheelchair. We had a lot of people trying to get him in, trying to carry him in and put him in the Spitfire. And he'd come from a Royal British Legion home. The matron of the home had driven him, and she went off for a cup of tea while I'm doing all this stuff. And so my friend Air Marshal Cliff Spink took him up in his Spitfire, and she came back and said, "Where's Brian?" and there's this roar, and we all ducked. And I said, I think he's up there.
Yeah.
And her 95-year-old veteran was in a Spitfire flying around, and he just enjoyed every single moment of it. They were a different generation.
Well, it's interesting though. You say that, but I mean, you wrote your Spitfire book and you called it this amazing British love story, because it's not just that generation who are still in love with the Spitfire. It means something very special to lots of us. Yeah,
it's true. I mean, it was an iconic aircraft, an amazing aircraft, and a game-changing aircraft. And still now, when you hear a Spitfire, you know it's a Spitfire. And you really do. And people stop
the Merlin engines.
Oh,
isn't it? Roar of the Merlin engines. That's what I used to say.
Well done.
I know. I remember. My dad was military as well, or military worked for the military. I used to go to air shows all the time when I was a kid, and we were always told, listen out for the roar of the Merlin engines. Yeah. That's the Spitfire. But the other plane I fell in love with as well, because it has so many extraordinary stories attached to it from World War II, is the Lancaster bomber. And you've written a book about that too.
Yeah. So after Spitfire, which became a success, I wrote Lancaster. And again, interviewed so many veterans about their experiences and the joy and the privilege of sitting with these guys. And they're so the thing is, and you've met some of them. The first thing is you say, tell me about what happened. I didn't do much. Yeah. Not much happened to me. And then because they're of a generation that didn't wear their heart on their sleeve, that they didn't talk about their experiences. When they came home, nobody wanted to hear about their experiences. But when you dig down, the stories of them, their families, what they went through, they lived together. They socialized together, and they often died together. And can you be lucky enough to speak to people whose friends died? I don't know, but I did. And I spoke to the daughters of fathers who died in 1943, who remember the last time the bus stopped with them when they were 5 years old, saying goodbye to them. And that was the last time they ever saw them. Speaking to children who only have memories and letters and photographs of their loved ones. And so it's been such an astonishing privilege to meet and to talk to the veterans and their loved ones. Listen, I know it's trite to say it, but it is honestly, it's an honor to do it. It is. And don't you wish you'd started all this 40 years ago? Not only that, I'll tell you what the worst thing is, Anne. So I've been doing this, I think, now for 20 years. I now use, I've got this lying here, I now use a digital recorder. Do you remember the old dictation tapes? Yeah. Where you had a tape? I used to use them. I recorded over all the interviews. I just recorded over them. And that now, that's living history. The Imperial War Museum, you'd be paying tens of thousands of pounds to hear the voices of the Battle of Britain, the voices of people long dead, some of the most famous people. But you never thought about that 20 years ago because they were still alive. Exactly. You never thought that these people will go. So that's one of my greatest regrets, that I recorded over some of the most amazing interviews. But there are, I talk about them as we're kids. We're the kids of that generation. And some of our fathers and mothers told us stories that we should write down before we forget them. I'm a huge advocate of that. We should all do that. In fact, was it the Lancaster bombers that were part of the Pathfinder squadrons? Yeah. It's amazing when you go on the internet and I found myself on a website where I was talking to the daughter of a Pathfinder squadron leader in Australia. She lives in Australia. Her dad was a Pathfinder squadron leader. He's long since died, but she remembers his stories. I couldn't believe that. I was actually talking to her in Australia about something that neither of us had any personal memory of, but her dad meant something to me. Isn't that incredible? And they are, and now, first of all, when they came home from war, nobody was really interested in their stories. The whole country had been at war. Everybody was touched by war. The world had been touched by war. So they didn't talk about it. One of the great privileges has been finding somebody and they say, oh yeah, I've got an old, I typed something up in 1959, and they'll get this thing out of and it's typed manuscript. There'll be 70,000 words. And so I absolutely agree with you. If your loved one is still alive, talk to them now, because they're living history. And if you don't talk to them, they'll be gone. It's really important that we record their sacrifice, because if we don't, so all the World War I veterans have sadly gone. Every person I spoke to for the Spitfire book is dead. Probably 70% of the people I spoke to the Lancaster book have gone. If we don't record their memories now, we'll have lost their memories.
Absolutely. If they're still alive, but if they're not, it's our generation now that have got to do it for them. We've got to be their voices, because the stories are just still so amazing. We've had lots of people watching at the moment, John. Erica from Portland in the United States says, as one proud veteran to another, I thank you for your service. That's lovely.
Thank you, Erica. I love you. Thank you.
Brian says, first of all, thank you for your service, John. I'm thoroughly enjoying your recollections and your way of telling stories. It reminds me of my father and RCAF. That's Royal Canadian Air Force, isn't it? Spitfire pilot Chris.
I think it'll be the Royal Canadian Air Force, yes.
Yeah. 416 Squadron, he says, telling my brother and I stories as we toured all over England and Scotland where he was born. He coined the term that we were the Three Musketeers, bed and breakfasting around his old haunts. Fantastic. His one rule, don't tell your mother some of these stories, and I'll introduce you to your other brothers and sisters. Ooh, you fighter pilots are all a breed. That's from Brian, naughty Brian. Another one from Mika in Montclair in the US says, what an awesome way of looking at the world now. John, your attitude after all the torture and to still be that positive. I went through World War II in occupied Holland and still cannot feel comfortable talking to older people about this. They were so awful to us, some of them. Thank you for your awesome live stream. Let us... we're enjoying listening and following you to be so positive. I've met Mika. Thank you very much, Mika. That's kind.
Thank you, Mika.
Daryl in the US says, firstly, thank you so very much for your service in the RAF. Question, the experience of ejecting from your aircraft is incredible. What training did you go through to prepare you for ejection, and what to expect with the speed and forces of that ejection? Again, thank you for your service. Yeah, how can you ever go through training for ejection like that?
There is some basic training. So back in the day, in the 80s when I started, they had an ejection rig where you would sit on a seat and pull a handle just so that you knew what happened, and you'd shoot up about, I don't know, 10 feet, 20 feet, something like that, but not very far. And we used to do parachute drills in the gym. Do you remember when we were at school and they had those benches that were about 9 inches high? And you used to kind of either jump over them. Well, our parachute training in the Royal Air Force was to stand on one of those 9-inch benches, jump off it, and do a little roll onto a gym mat. So that was our parachute. So that, but in general terms, no, you didn't really do any training, because in many respects, it was either going to happen or it wasn't going to happen. So you just knew the handle was there. It was always there. You never thought much about it until the point where you needed it. And I've been speaking to quite a few people about this recently, about ejecting. And you simply pull the handle, and a second later, 2 seconds later, it had worked. And if it didn't work, you weren't there to tell the story. But it's an incredible invention.
My goodness. Cheryl says, happy Veterans Day, John. Thank you for your service. God bless you. Linda says, did you ever meet Saddam Hussein in person? You never did you?
I did not, but I think I sent you some pictures of when I went back to Iraq in 2000, I think. So around nearing the 10th anniversary of the Gulf War, I went back to Iraq and I spent some time. So this is still when Saddam Hussein was the brutal dictator. But I went and toured Iraq a little bit, went back to the prison cell that I was in, and I think you've got one of those pictures somewhere.
Have somewhere.
Met some of the military people who tried to kill me.
Went back into the prison cell because that must have been the terrible experience. There you are on the left.
Yeah, so that's on the left. The one on the right's a different photograph. That's from a documentary I made with some World War II veterans. But the one on the left is me back in the cell in the middle of Baghdad, where I was held for probably 10 days or something. And what was curious about the whole thing was I met Iraqi. So this was 2000, so 9 years after the first Gulf War, Desert Storm, as your American viewers will remember it. And I met some of the men who tried to kill me. I met Iraqi pilots who tried to shoot us down. I met some of the Iraqi military people who'd kept us in prison. And it was great. We went out and had a beer. We did, honestly. We went down to Basra, and I met an Iraqi Air Force pilot who'd been trying to kill me and my friends those days. And he said, "Mr. John, is this you?" So he knew who I was. And he took me into the base and he showed me around, and he phoned a restaurant in Basra, and we went out and we had lunch, I think, for 3 hours. And it was.
But how do you come to terms with that?
But if you speak to some of the World War II veterans who meet up with their German compatriots, you know, the notion that we hate the people that we are at war with is just not true. We are the products of a system. Does that sound? I think that sounds okay. We are military people doing a job. I believed in what I did. Don't get me wrong. And Colonel Ali believed in what he did. He was fighting for his cause, his country. I was fighting for my cause, my country. So we were no different to the Spitfire pilots. We were no different to the Messerschmitt pilots. We are no different to the Lancaster pilots. We are no different to the Luftwaffe pilots. And after
John, you wouldn't have tortured a helpless prisoner.
No. And to be fair, none of the military people that I met had. That was a one step removed from Saddam Hussein's secret police, and that was different. But you know, it was war and horrible things happened in war, and I hold no grudges against anybody no matter what happened. But going back, meeting people, meeting the beautiful, astonishing, lovely Iraqi people still under Saddam Hussein's brutal regime was really moving. Because you begin to understand how warfare affects, I'm going to say normal people, but those people on the ground, you begin to understand it. That's not to say that warfare is not right in some circumstances, but normally it's the good, honest, decent people, whether they're in Iraq, whether they're in Afghanistan, whether in Syria, they're the ones who are affected by this.
Well, that's another question that Linda in the United States has put. Do you think there is any hope for the cessation of wars?
Oh, no.
Or is it
listen, Linda, thank you for your question, but I'm sorry to say that since man has walked out of a cave, and normally it is men, not always, but normally it is men, and picked up a branch and thought this is going to be useful, wars, conflicts happen. And whether it's on a tiny scale, a village v village 2,000 years ago, or a massive scale of country v country, or region v region, religion v religion. So I don't think. I think we're becoming more attuned to what it means, but no, I think that I'm afraid. I don't think that there's a chance in my conceivable view that we will not have further conflict. I'm sad to say. What will be interesting. So if you go back to World War II, we fought about a belief and land. And countries. Go to the Falklands War in 1982 in the South Atlantic, and it was about possession of territory. Go to Iraq in 1991 with me, and that was about invasion of another country.
Of territory.
Iraq and Afghanistan was about fighting a belief system, and I think we got it wrong. I think the wars in the future will be about migration, water, resources. And I think that's where we'll go. But no, I don't see things changing that much.
Okay, let's talk happier things then. Because you're a pilot yourself.
A navigator, and my pilot friends will be shouting at the screen. I was a navigator.
Sorry, okay.
Here's the difference to help your viewers. What do you say to a navigator who's left the Air Force? You say, 2 Big Macs and a large fries, please.
you?
So I was a navigator. I sat in the back seat of the toilet.
All right. How would you like to be a navigator on a space flight?
Oh, I think that I am now too old, too fat, too weak of the knees. I watched William Shatner do it. Oh my God, was he 90 something or 80 something? I don't think that I could. I'd be too scared. I honestly would be too scared. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
I'll take you up with me. As soon as I get my invitation,
You're
coming
flying
with
the
me.
space shuttle.
I'd just love to. Oh, come on. If you were offered, you'd do it. Look, it's been wonderful to talk to you. And how many books did you say you'd authored now?
You know what? I can't remember. I think I think it's about 17, something like that.
Well, look, I know that there's a little button that people can press if they want to access any of your books. I know at least 5 of them are novels as well. Yeah. So you've written about anything and everything there is to write about in the same sort of way that you've been able to speak to us in the last hour. It's been terrific talking to you, John. Thank you so much. And where are you going to be? Where are you going to be on Sunday when it is in Britain, Remembrance Day, when the hopefully Queen will come out?
Remembrance Day, on Remembrance Sunday, I will be at the Cenotaph with 10,000 other veterans.
All right, well, we'll find you.
Yeah, we will gather, we will laugh, and we will remember, and we will joke while we're meeting up. And then when we march on, it'll be somber, and we will be hoping that Her Majesty is there. But if she isn't, nobody would want her to be there if it was anything other than the best circumstances. Yeah. So it's a great day full of joy and silliness, but also sorrow and remembrance, Anne.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess that's humanity for you, isn't it? Yeah. John, thank you so much for joining us today, and for everybody watching. And I know we have so many people watching from all over the world, all over Europe, and particularly throughout the United States. It is a very important day for all of us to remember our veterans and what they have given, so that we can all laugh and joke and have wonderful interviews like we just have had with you, John. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic to speak to you again, my old friend. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Well, look at that. And let me just tell you that next week is British History Week, and I'm going to be meeting Winston Churchill, amongst others. I never thought I'd ever say that. Look at that picture. Yes, I know he isn't really Winston Churchill, but he really was very, very cool. So next week we are celebrating all sorts of amazing stories from British history. And amongst other people who have written extraordinary books about British history, I'll be meeting that particular Winston Churchill. Watch out for that. So that's me next week here on Viking TV. Meanwhile, have a wonderful, safe and happy week, and have a joyous occasion remembering our veterans today and for the rest of the week too. Bye-bye.